All right, everyone, welcome to the 1-3 preview video. What we're doing today is we're moving on to some new ideas. We're spending a day on concepts that will come up in the rest of the course, but we're defining nature, wilderness, and pastoralism. What is pastoralism? Well, we might as well begin there. That's what this reading, the She is reading on. It's about 6 pages in all. And kind of the first 5 pages have most of the important info that you'll need. So we might have just asked ourselves a basic question. I think we know what nature and wilderness are, even though as we learn in this reading, they're going to be defined differently. They're going to be defined in different ways. Again, always according to human needs in a certain historical period. But what's pastoralism? If you're unfamiliar, this comes straight out of the She's essay. It's the idea that country life is better than city life. That would be an easy way to look at it. The country life is simpler, maybe more humble, maybe more honest. There's more cheating and crime and those types of things going on in the cities, or more political underhandedness in the cities, or the castles, right? Manners of the time. That would be an older view. A more modern view of it, then, it's basically the same thing, is to say, it's the idea or the need that we have as people to disengage from the complexity of modern life, to disengage from dominant culture, and to seek the basis for a simpler, more harmonious way of life. Okay? And so in some ways, it's leaving the Twin Cities to move to Winona, I suppose, would be one funny yet easy example. To seek a smaller, quieter life, because the other areas of civilization carry with them too much busyness, too much hunger for power, or other negative aspects of life that get in the way of either human development or sort of our communion with nature, right? And so that is pastoralism, the need to escape to the country in some way, or seeing country life is better than city life, which is too easy of a binary to begin with, right? But that's what this chapter is all about, is binaries, right? You'll even see on page 5, a very important one I'd like you to commit to your notes. This right here, you'll see on page 5. And it's all these binaries that we use when we talk about the environment: wilderness versus civilization, nature versus culture, right? And these things it's never an easy division between these things. These things are actually merged, and these can harm our thinking when we see these two easy binaries or divisions. But there they are nonetheless, and they will be helpful in helping us interpret what nature writers or environmental thinking is saying, right? Otherwise, let's go back up to the top here real quick. So some historical overview here that comes out of the reading, but I can say a bit more about it. In the late 17th and mainly in the early 18th century, we see an interest in nature for its own sake, an interest in the sublime. What is the sublime? It's that beauty or form, in this case nature, can inspire awe, some sort of awe that overwhelms us. We can't even describe it, right? And you've all had this feeling before if you've, maybe the first time you drove outside of Winona and you saw just how large, like, say, Lake Pepin was, or driving to La Crosse, when you view the ocean, when you go to the mountains, and you say, wow, and it just doesn't seem like there's the right words for what you are seeing and experiencing. And we try to take a picture of it, but the picture never looks as good as the real thing, right? We keep trying to capture, I think, in the modern age, the sublime with our photos, our little digital cameras, and we never can, right? And so that's what the sublime is. And so people are becoming more and more aware of this in the 18th century and into the 19th century. And what else happens around this time then as sort of a side effect of this, or maybe it's a cause of this? Middle-class tourism, mainly from people living in the cities, begins. People want to go out into nature and experience it. They want to climb mountains for fun on the weekends. They want to go hiking for fun. Those used to be forms of work, right? But now they are forms of recreation. So this is the beginning of an environmental movement of sorts. People are beginning to appreciate nature for its own sake. And why? Well, there's some change in religious thinking as well at this time. It's not that religion necessarily is a lesser force in people's lives, but it's in competition with science and ecological thinking and some other things that are going on that religion and religious thought had never been in competition with previously. And for this reason, people are asking new questions about nature and its relevancy and purpose in our lives. So cities are also growing. This creates a city-country binary. Clearly, cities look ugly compared to the beauty of the countryside. And so that creates one of those binaries. As I just said, science is advancing and there's competition with religious explanations or views of nature, what counts as spirituality, et cetera, et cetera. And also wealth is growing and travel is becoming easier. You can hop on a train and a few days later be in a different part of the country at this point, right? Um, so all of those historical changes lead us to some changes in the way we see nature. Here's some good examples from the course we've already seen. Remember the poem God's Grandeur, written in the 19th century. That is about the beauty and energy of nature, even if it is connected to religious poetry. There's not a lot of old religious values in that, but loving nature kind of for its own sake. That is a poem about the grandeur of nature, right, as well, the sublime. And then there's London, about the ugliness of urban life. So we can see that the poems we've read from this period connect directly with what we're learning in this reading. So here's a bit on pastoralism. You'll want to go through and tease this out for yourself in your reading and capture this in your notes. But artists are essentially painting realism, realistic sort of landscapes, yet they're stretching their techniques to dramatize nature a little bit. Nature isn't the background for people anymore. It's dramatic in its own right. It has a story, and it is a character worth paying attention to. And so that is something fairly new as well in art and just in the thinking of the day, right? So this can define the 19th century for us, especially the later 19th century. We do start to see some polarities come across in art, some of the lightness and the darkness to create conflict and drama in nature itself. We see civilization versus wilderness. And also, here's an interesting one, the rural versus wilderness. So it's not all just the country versus the city. That's too simple. We see the rural and the rural life, which could be agricultural or simply the simple life living outside of town, maybe more in communion than nature. But then there's the wilderness, which is much more raw and forceful and dangerous and threatening. And that's very, very different. It's the uninhabited portion of nature versus the inhabited part, right? So those are very, very different as well. We should pay attention to that. Just thinking of city and country is too simple. And of course, that remains true today as well. Here is the grid from page 5. You can use all these opposites to begin to interpret what, say, your essays from today are arguing, about definitions of nature. Is it opposing them to culture? Or do you maybe have a writer that's saying, hey, no, nature and culture are one and the same, right? Maybe we could look at a poem like Negro Speaks of Rivers. We talked about it as sort of bringing some culture into nature, or maybe more so nature into culture, that we define rivers according to our cultural and spiritual needs, right? So there is, a merging of those, yet they're still separate at the same time. So think about these type of things. I can talk a bit more about that in the review video. Catch that there's the soft pastoral, which is sort of cultivated and nice, maybe the countryside, versus the hard pastoral, which is sort of the windswept slopes, the total solitude. This is the rugged and unforgiving aspects of nature, the places where you don't want to be caught, right? Nature is a dangerous character in these places, rather than a place where you can have a picnic and you can be in communion with it. We start to see people then test themselves against the elements. Or this hard pastoral, a place of total solitude, might be an unreachable place. And then we start to see people that want to conquer it, of course. We're back to domination and power over nature. Here's some real life examples that happened not too far after this period. People begin to want to climb Mount Everest. It's dangerous. People can die. But we're going to do it nonetheless. Why? Because we have to conquer this hard pastoral, this place that is dangerous, right? And so we're back to the Bible in some ways. We have to dominate nature, trekking to the North Pole as well. So you can see a lot of adventure comes from this. You're not camping in a nice place, but rather you're testing yourself against nature. You're going to be bigger than nature. That's where adventure stories come from. All right. So moving on then, here's a big idea. The art and cultural thinking of this time promoted a conflict between civilization and wilderness. This means that although people are interested in nature, they are reaffirming their distance from it too at the same time. So we're still not up to ecological thinking, because ecological thinking would say, hey, humans and the environment have to be in a balance together. This is more like nature is out there somewhere. I can stay in my city and then go visit it on the weekends. And so it's a very, very different type of thinking. We're not up to ecological thinking quite yet. That's why we're dealing with definitions today. Otherwise, for this preview video, I'll just say this. You've got a reading by Thoreau. Please read the bio quickly on Thoreau. He's a very important figure, and the bio will teach you why. I would just say that he's one of the first voices in America to sing nature's accolades. Nature is something beautiful and sublime to him. I give you his journals so that you just have these little snapshots of his thinking, which I think is maybe a more interesting way to approach him, since we're not going to read a lot of him, but we still want to get a feel for what he does. And we can see, you don't have to write all of these in your post, but pick out a few good ones that you really, really like. He's doing some very, very different things. He's appreciating sort of the time, the long duration of nature in some of these, and something sort of ecological in his thinking. Other ones, the earth is gyrating around, and how can we just sit down when there's all this exciting nature around us, right? So he's in very different moods when he's writing these, which I think makes it kind of fun. So tap into something that you want to. There's another one here that I like, where he's watching a tree be cut down and thinking about that and what it entails. So maybe more of a reflection on our uses of nature, right? So that's Thoreau. He's a major voice. And what I did today with the readings then is Thoreau is first, Roosevelt is sort of the next generation or two later, and then another couple generations after that when we read Leopold. So you're going to see a progression of ideas throughout here, and that's what we're looking for today. So read on Roosevelt. Hopefully you know he was our president, but he was a president that we connect with the conservation of federal lands, federal parks, and eventually what became state parks. That whole idea that we shouldn't sell everything, but the government should own and protect some land simply for its value as nature or wilderness, is his. He's the one that did that. So what we want to do with him as well is look through and say, well, what are his values and attitudes toward nature? Does he appreciate it as something in its own right? Does he see it mainly as being for human uses? He was a big game hunter. So we could think about that too. Does he just want a place to go hunting, or does he see something more ecological, the balance of nature, or the sublimity, the sublimeness of nature as well? So you can again go back and say, well, what kind of ideas from these binaries do we see inside of his essays? Okay. What we might also look to is his speech at the Grand Canyon when it was becoming a park. And we might look at some of the things he says here about why we should preserve nature. And so that would be a good part of an answer for him as well. You might also find it interesting that he talks about Native Americans here as well, and what the country owes them and their connection with the environment as well. So you could look into that and have an answer on that. And the last one we'll read comes from a bit later, probably around the 1930s or 40s. This would have been written. I can't remember the exact year. 49. There we go, I think. And what we want to look for here, put you back on this screen, read his bio again to see what he was. Leopold was a conservationist. He actually worked for the state of Wisconsin for a while. So this essay starts with him hunting and using the environment, but this is an essay about his conversion to a larger way of thinking about nature. So again, we can look at those binaries from page 5 of the She's reading. But in the end, the big question I'd like you to think about is, what does it mean to think like a mountain? That's what we're shooting for. And so this is the ending point of today. We started late 17th, early 18th century. We make it up to about the 1940s, right? And just these few short essays. What does it mean to think like a mountain? How, you might say this, how is this different than Thoreau and Teddy Roosevelt, right? So how is he going beyond them if he is? And that would be a nice way to close down your thinking. And of course, you have the reading questions for that as well. So enjoy this module. It's a good one. It's a fun one. A lot of short, brief readings to kind of give you a lot of ideas real quick. All right. Thank you. We'll see you soon.